Hello,
Hello, everybody.
and there we are again.
Do you hear me? That's me listening to our Slack still. Okay, that's why the quality was so
No,
low.
I was leaving that one, so
There
I
we go.
think I think it's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, we're back after some health breaks, vacation, back to our
Uh,
regular schedule.
okay, my vacation was mainly about work, so
Work vacation.
vacation. I was
Yeah.
working more than usual, but without the interruption of clients. That's great. So that's how uh, yeah vacation should be, right?
Mm.
We're short before releasing, and that is now a very hot phase, and it will probably will be staying hot. I need to show that one. That's just so great, but
Product
so
launches are great, huh?
yeah, yeah, they are, and the
We've
product itself. It will be interesting. I will make an announcement next week.
Oh, okay. Looking forward to that. We have quite a few people on Substack already. Substack crew is coming in. Stefan, hello. Lambert, Murphy, Akiba, Jakir, Lorenzo. Over on your stack, we have um. oh, Okay, way too many tabs
I don't
open.
see names there somehow. I see just people with
Really?
names. Yes.
Okay. Okay, maybe we can.
Give them a
Okay.
moment.
Yeah,
They
give them.
will join. Anyway, I think we have quite a lot of overlap anyway. So
Mhm. So, from the perspective of we're doing like a mixed sessions starting from March. So after we did 2D February, we started our AI topics mixed together with continuous delivery and continuous delivery adjacent, basically anything you would need for modern software engineering. Nowadays, what is popular is essentially modern software engineering because that's always popular. Plus, right now, AI is very interesting because it is one of the, let's say, the fastest growing products in the tech space.
key technology. I think it is worth calling it a key technology
Hmm.
because it is not from the standpoint of replacing anyone or something like that. It is it in itself. It's a type of technology with a huge impact, and it actually helps other things to actually become faster as well. So the
Hmm.
development of things can become faster. We see advancement in medicine. We see pattern recognition just helps everywhere right now,
Hmm.
and it helps in software development as well. But I think it is not what the people were afraid of in the very beginning. That is not what it is. It is something different, and it turned out and it developed itself into that new thing or new things, right? It is new key technologies which now enables other things to become faster, more efficient. In other cases, even more problematic. So it's not only positive right now what happens regarding AI. There is a lot
Hmm.
of crap right now as well, but it's not as bad and severe as people think because people often compare AI to the wrong things. It's a little bit like AI is not the wonder machine which can do anything. It is not intelligent, even though it's the name does carry it, but it is not intelligent. It's just a
Hmm.
extremely advanced pattern recognition machine, and it feels intelligent, but it isn't. It doesn't have any sense of creativity or something like that. It is simply following a structured pattern, and it can't basically outgrow itself,
It's
right?
Stack Overflow on steroids in
Exactly.
some aspects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And today we want to talk about is it actually worth it to use it in software development? Because software development is our both common space. We are both heavily in there. You as a coach, I momentarily as a founder, right? And is AI helping? Is it worth to spend money on AI? Let's those small amounts like $20 a month for a ChatGPT or like $500 a month for a better agent like this. So there are, the ranges are
Yeah, 500
quite
per engineer. But, I
per
mean, that's
engineer.
important per
That's
engineer.
that's that's the price if you use it AI full time.
Yeah.
On some point in time, it lowers again because you you use it in the beginning more to actually learn how to use it, and then it lowers a little bit when you know I can use it for this bit now, but it will be crap. So you stop using it. Instead, you do it yourself, and then you see clearly after a while, and that's for me the case. You see clearly after a while when I use AI here, it definitely will save me hours, right? It is especially in large front-end code bases. We are now scratching the 200 klog. We made huge things in the last 6 months. So we have quite a lot there. So regarding TypeScript files right now, and so there is a lot of things. So I think it's 2.5K files. The solution we bring online now, and doing changes there, which are like you need to change something, refactor something, add something which alters a lot of implementations you have already built in. That is something where a pattern machine really shines. It is like you are really happy when the AI can do these things for you. And they are basically 99% of the times they're working flawlessly. It is what it can really do very well, and it saves you a ton of time. But that feels more like a better extension of good IDEs like WebStorm or IntelliJ in general.
Yeah.
It feels like an extension of that. So that is what you it's a little bit like the next level refactoring tools in that moment.
Agreed.
When it comes to generative AI, things become way more complex to use it effectively than people think. So vibe coding is nonsense. I think that is now debunked. We don't need to talk about that anymore. It doesn't work. And if you want to use generative AI, you need to prepare a lot as an engineer to make it worth. So when you put in, let's say 300, take 300, let's take $300 a month per engineer, right? So it means 10 engineers, you pay 3K, which is nearly the 11th engineer
Let's
in
make
some
it,
countries.
sorry for interrupting. Let's make it concrete.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Cloud AI. Cloud AI, their max package starts at 100 per month.
Exactly, but that is a new package. The max package is when you only have this and that amount of queries and tokens in a specific amount of time. I mean, that's actually quite interesting because it would fit now as well for me. But for especially in the beginning parts, it basically I would overuse it in any aspect. So we are still on the pay as you go.
That's the individual package. In team and enterprise, it's a little bit different. An API usage, if you're doing any kind of agentic work and you're hooking it into Claude, you're basically pay as you go. And then it's basically scaling infinitely until you exceed but whatever token space you're looking for.
In my case, we have now the 11th of the month, and I'm quite cheap this month with $90 so far. So that's my personal usage of Claude Code. It was way higher, so I think something between 400 to 500 was the highest per month. But I don't think I get to that point anymore, and the reason for that is many of the things which were created were never found. So basically, they were never committed. So that's a little bit like I'm following that pattern to decide when to commit something, and then it's basically part. And many things don't pass my expectations and my quality idea, right? Especially when you have things which are large and you need, especially in the front end, you often have that you create 10 files at the same time to create one feature. You have styles, you have subcomponents, components itself, you have some function files, some utils, those kind of things. GraphQL, maybe you have those files which are only the patterns for that one. You need to do a lot of things. And the only way I found in the last now 4 months of using it was to have a very well maintained technical or machine readable documentation for what you want to do, and you need to maintain it basically with every feature you do, which means that if you create something new to a translation system of your application, which can be complex, and you make updates to it, you need to make sure that the last thing you do is actually telling the AI to document whatever it had learned from now into that document, and then you need to make sure that is actually the right thing, because otherwise it will start to go back to this typical non-context hallucination problem where the AI always try to do something for the money but not what you need, and the more precise you can be, the better it becomes. The problem is it becomes way more expensive. This is the reason why you cannot compare ChatGPT to Claude Code when it comes to money, because the context files alone are several thousand lines of code, sometimes 10,000 lines of code.
Yeah.
So if you say, okay, I have a feature with, in our case, translations, tenant system, design system, CMS system, and you put all these files right together, you come to 50K files, and then it needs to understand them, and it basically preloads this amount of data before you actually ask a question, and then you quickly get to the context limit. That's what you see. You pretty fast get to the context limit. And of course, let's say a feature prompt, when you have a series of features, or a feature you create with a series of prompts, and you do manual stuff in between, and it needs to reread everything because you have made changes yourself. So you work in, combination together with the AI, which definitely makes sense, because then you can, you really need to do that actually. And that makes it quite expensive. So we're talking about, if you're now working for 15 minutes on something with the AI together, or let it be 30 minutes, you come to something like $8 to $10 at minimum. So that is what it costs you to do that. And so is it an extremely high price? Well, so in the perspective of an individual, it seems a lot, right? But if it's usable and if it brings you forward, it might be an interesting thing. This is the question. Is it worth it? This is the actual question of the topic today. And that is, I would say, if you have everything prepared, as I say, if your code base is following patterns in general, so every section of your front end technically looks the same, in the pattern, you have everywhere the same idea, you have followed, you even refactor a lot to stay on some baseline, right? Then it starts to make sense to use AI, because the success rate or the satisfaction rate of seeing the results is good. And by that, when you have we say, okay, that was good now, then it indicates that you have saved time, mental capacity. You can, in my case, I'm a founder, I can work longer hours without being exhausted. It's not recommended, but this is how I see it, right? So it helps me a lot to continue, for example, coding in the evening hours, something like that. It helps me a lot, but only if it's not creating something which even hinders me in quality or something like that. And that is only possible, hey Akash, that is only possible, as I said, if you really clean up your project and write context files wherever you can. And this is, first of all, expensive. The larger your team becomes, the more complex it becomes as well to maintain that. It is already complex to do that with humans. And you need to now have a machine in between, and everyone needs to align so that this is actually working. If you don't have that, to be honest, I cannot imagine a way where AI is actually benefiting you in your software development. So AI is only working when your entire process is already good. So if you have a good testing strategy in place, at best TDD. If you have that, that's half of the rent in that moment. So if you don't have TDD, so you don't write specifications up front, right? So you basically cannot prompt up front. That's the very same thing. So you need to do, or both are very aligned to each other. And I really realized that it doesn't really saves you time up front, the AI. The AI is only good in executions, which means that everything regarding design, everything, when you take a look at front end, right? UX, optimizations, AI isn't working well in that area. It is simply not good. It can't really use it. So AI is good for large logical things, big pattern refactorings, the boilerplate setup of a huge component when you have a very, very specified and clear design system. So it is very clear how components, subcomponents, states, and everything is managed in your application. Then you can use it to build and scaffold a large application feature for you, and then go and update it step by step based on a test, right? These kind of things. If you don't have that in place, you can't basically use it effectively.
Mhm.
So I would say the sweet spot right now for me as a founding engineer who is coding a lot in React world, right? Next.js, React, GraphQL, those kind of things, TypeScript. Definitely, I would say the sweet spot right now is something between $200 to $300. If you use more than that, it's an indicator that you are probably doing it wrong. And if you use less than that, you are probably not using it at all. That's
Yeah, you can get, like, you can rank up, you can get to several thousands, considering that you might be accidentally using several agents, right? So it's 300, maybe 400, 500 for one service of
But
some
to be
kind
honest,
of LLM, some kind of AI.
I never saw another agent than Claude Code which is actually capable of doing what I just said.
Most people that I know are using either ChatGPT and Claude or a separate ChatGPT license in addition to a Copilot license. So usually most engineers that I talk to, that I work with, they have 2 subscriptions. Whether one of them is individual, one of them is from the company, or both of them are from the company, or they have an individual ChatGPT and a company ChatGPT, or maybe it's an individual Copilot and then it is a bit messy, but at the minimum, people who are serious about AI, I think they have at least 2 subscriptions. At least that's what I saw.
So I use right now Claude Code as my main subscription. I have my standard ChatGPT Pro license. I have Junie Tester from JetBrains. I don't like it at all.
I'm counting.
And I have the new GitHub Agent. I use the preview version as well to comparison reasons and for simple things where I'm too greedy for ChatGPT for Claude Code, and when I know it can do that, and that's it. Actually, I was testing out Windsurf. Windsurf once, but Cursor as well.
I mean that's different. If you're testing it out, of course you'll take it for a test.
Yeah, with the same code base. But to be honest, the problem with those IDEs is that they try to go into this vibe coding promises and they basically can't keep up with that. And what Claude Codes what Claude Code is actually making so interesting is that you can still use a fully fledged IDE and not this stripped down cursor thing there, right? You have a very well designed IntelliJ IDE which can handle 200k Klog lines upwards even with a monorepository without breaking. And you can still use the menu refactoring tools like you use as a good engineer and all these kind of features, and you have still an AI agent which supports you. Of course, it's more expensive than all the other tools out there, but it actually is doing what the others are promising to do. Claude Code and Junie, which is built in and doing the same. It is not doing what you tell it to do. So sorry for that. It is so immature right now. So you ask for, hey, I have a problem with the translation system. Then it basically takes 30 seconds and then it tells you, I have fixed a bug in the button and the tests are corrected. And I never ask for that. What you have done here, right? It is total nonsense what happens there. This is you don't really want to use it anymore. ChatGPT GitHub Agent is actually quite good, but it feels so limited because what really is so good with a Claude Code is that it's actually a thing outside of your IDE. And you communicate with it like with an engineer. So you say, that's the context, we need to do this, that's the idea, that needs to be the test cases, or implement that first, then we need to go to the next step. And you basically stay in a communication with someone outside of your IDE, and you see the changes in the IDE. That's really fun to work with.
You use pull requests and issues as like a prompting tool to trigger an agent.
Exactly, but as you would talk to a human being, that's the interesting part. And
to a human being on an open source project or through a process where the organization might be adopting open source workflows, like Gitflow, for example. The issue that I have with such usages is that they become very expensive on the actual token space. Plus, they become expensive socio-technically because now you're bound basically to what we know to be a subpar engineering practice, which is if we have this genie that can build code very quickly, I want to collaborate with it. But now we're using the worst collaboration tool, which is asynchronous pull requests and sort of talking to them in the browser rather than coding with them. So again, it has its context. It's probably built for a particular type of organizational flow. It gets very difficult to balance them all out.
Yeah, but
Prashant has a
the only
question on my Substack. If you can, I could just read it out. Question for experts: what about agentic flows for, say, deployment, Cube, auto deployment, development adjacent things? So I've used CodeScene. CodeScene has now ACE, and I've used it, and I've reviewed it last week. I had a sort of filler episode. I wasn't sure whether Adrian was coming.
For deployment, or do you mean code reviewing during deployment?
So during the deployment pipeline, it attaches itself and gives. So it spawns an agent when it detects a code smell, and then it basically explains to you what the code smell is, whether it's severe or not. It uses an agent to reason about the severity of the issue, and if it is severe, it gives you suggestions about how to refactor it.
But isn't that integration related and not deployment related? Deployment related is for me the act to deploy something to somewhere.
It depends. It's in the deployment pipeline, right? So it's in the integration/deployment pipeline. We can call it either way. In a highly efficient team, there's little difference between integration and deployment.
Yeah, of course, but
yeah, it's possible that Prashant is meaning something else. And anybody else, if you have any questions, do send your questions through now.
I had several other things I saw in the last weeks, which were the people were saying you never need to do your infrastructure deployment things because AI is doing that now for you. And the thing is, I think that is actually not a problem which needs to be solved.
Yeah, I think so. So SRE skills are annoying they are such a secondary platform specialization that they usually get in the way for, So to answer the question directly, I would say if you're looking at it as an AI lens, I would suggest caution, because you might be looking to create a silo or create a department to scope the problem to such a degree that the AI can solve it well, because it is so bad at solving general problems, right? So it is like we need to be careful on, is this a problem that exists had I not chosen AI to solve it? For example...
Yeah, this is what I meant, yeah.
Yeah, so we have product development as well, right? So it is on the... Okay, clarification, Prashant says, I saw many posts about automating irritating, monotonous things that are not really coding. Yes, but a lot of things fit into that, right? For example, I use ChatGPT in agent mode, and I'm also experimenting with Gemini. So what I recommend developers use ChatGPT or AIs is usually like use it for everything except coding. That's what I'm not calling it agentic flows for deployment, but you mentioned it as an example, Prashant, so I don't want to put more words into your mouth. I generally tell them use it for everything except coding and see if there's space for more. Because otherwise, for example, if you're using Grammarly, that's already AI assisted.
It was even AI before ChatGPT.
It was even AI before, yeah. It had LLM adjacent use cases, right? So there's a huge overlap of our industry and the product industry and just product engineering and tech in full isolation, just coding, that benefits from a general improvement of better writing or better technical writing, right? So there are tools that just make you a better technical writer that are worth investing into, right? So if For example, 20 years ago, I was coding in Notepad++, and it had, so it never ran the code. It was incapable of running code.
Mhm.
What it did is it gave me code highlighting for HTML. It didn't give me code highlighting for PHP, right? So I had to make a decision for HTML. I open in this program, PHP I open in, I don't know, Aptana or something equivalent,
NetBeans.
NetBeans, or yeah. So because otherwise you had to open it in Emacs or Vim or FrontPage or Dreamweaver
God.
or Cold Fusion, right? So you need, but the point is, the most popular word processor at the time was Word, and you couldn't do coding in Word because coding required full access to the source code that Word was too opinionated for. Like Word, the way it saved the file, you could not write code with it because it required raw access to the source code. Plus, it required raw access to the source code in such a way that when you're reading it, you want colors to be added, you want indentation to be added, you want inlay hints to be added in a way that is not present in the prose itself. And that's what we nowadays call IDEs, right? So solving that part of the writing process is worth investing money into, which is why we pay for IDEs, which is why there's billion-dollar companies built around supporting VS Code, Visual Studio, IntelliJ, and all the other ecosystems. And you have an equivalent of this for, I don't know, for hardware. You have equivalents for this for embedded systems, for AI systems. You know, you have the whole Jupyter notebooks that are being developed. You have the whole Android Studio. Then you have Dart, Flutter. I forget what the Apple's newest language is. The one from Objective C.
Xcode Swift.
Swift, yeah, Swift, right? Xcode. So these are environments that allow developers to read code in an augmented way and write code, write English text essentially in an augmented way. AIs are an extension of that, right? But that's not the only thing they're good at. There's a lot of English prose being written that is not code. My suggestion would be try to solve those problems first. So, for example, I use Gemini, like the free tier on it, because it's integrated. I use Google Suite for business. I use Gmail individually. So I have two Geminis hooked up to each other. I have Zoom hooked up to my Gemini. I have my Slack hooked up through my calendar, Slack hooked up to Zoom. And basically what I can do is I can say, hey, I'm planning a workshop. My next week, I need to move a meeting. Here's my list of priorities. Help me move one low priority meeting next week and give me a draft. Like you choose based on this priority list and give me drafts for those emails. Right. So I can tell it to, hey, look at my address book, look at my calendar, pick 2 slots. I'm too busy, draft the emails and help me send those emails, right? Things that otherwise would take a developer 30 minutes or an hour in your schedule. Or I have a meeting tomorrow for a spec review. I need to send a meeting agenda, help me set it up, right? So that in itself is worth it. More than, let's say, trying to get those 30 minutes or 1 hour with clever code writing or whatever the equivalent might be in your engineering process, right? So my advice generally, try to solve adjacent problems first, adjacent non-technical problems first. So organization, meetings, documentation, communicating with each other, just the general quality of the prose with which you're communicating. It's like, hey, I always write very long emails, help me shorten them. My meeting requests never have agendas. Please create a meeting. Here's a transcript from the previous meeting. Help me create an agenda for the next one if it's a recurring meeting, right? So these things, there are agents, ChatGPT and Gemini stand out here that are very easy to hook up to a business calendar or a full suite of business calendars plus your address book and your emails, if you're okay with that.
How do you do that with ChatGPT as a short?
ChatGPT, you
course.
can do it in agent mode with your calendar. You cannot do it with your emails. Gemini just automatically has access to your emails, so that makes it a little bit easier. Gemini knows how to index your emails. So Gemini uses search through your inbox to basically create context for querying.
And asking for a friend, how do you activate ChatGPT agent mode? I don't know that.
I'm not sure. I'm on the Pro package.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm not sure. So I have trouble keeping up with all the things that are coming out.
Me too.
ChatGPT and product. So it is definitely an individual one.
It's an entire own client, or
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was a custom prompter, like a custom GPT, or whether it was operator from ChatGPT. Yeah, it's like, again, I don't know what they're called, but I am using them. I think in the most part, I just open up a new prompt and I connect together there's a plus button in ChatGPT. I don't want to be so technical, but you go to ChatGPT, new chat, you click on tools, and then you help it add, you give it access to stuff, right? So you can connect to Google Drive, you can connect Studios, you can add photos, you can add files, you can give it access to a calendar. Right, so that's what I would start with. ChatGPT has an email assistant. Again, but these are custom GPTs.
This is the Pro plan. Okay, now what? I understand.
Yeah, that's on the Pro plan.
$200.
That's on the yeah.
Just wait a month until it's in the normal plan. That's normal.
Yeah. So again, there's the Plus plan, and there's the Pro. So it's, again, I don't I don't recommend you just buy it for trying it out, but it's it's worth checking in if this is in some way helpful. Or you can also just export your entire calendar and just put it in a PDF.
I'm a professional in moving meetings into the future, so I never used AI for this, and I'm pretty fast in it myself.
I get annoyed by syncing with ChatGPT in this way until Gemini came out. Now Gemini can do it very easily, so I've sort of started using Gemini for
But only with Gmail, isn't it?
Because I'm using Gmail, yes. So it is the AI that is in the ecosystem already, the same way that I'm using Notion AI for my Notion documents, because it is extremely annoying to build like your own low-code MCP across AI providers. For example, using Claude LLM inside Notion, like that's extremely, like that would be very useful for like sharing prompt space, but it's tedious to like hook them up together. Even if I do hook them up together, and I might want to use Notion with my ChatGPT. My ChatGPT has memories and has pre-prompts intended for my personal usage, and they don't lend themselves well to like agentic usage for Notion. So then I would have to turn off the memory and not create new memories from that, because I don't know what memories the agentic usage might create for my individual usage. So like that whole context sharing
two
and
split brains facing each
it's
other.
split brain. Yeah. So it's like, I would actually need to have like control over, hey, is this that persona or this persona? And there are now tools that are like second degree agent tools that allow you to do that. Like AI automation, building your own agents, where you say, no, you're this persona, you only do product questions. When we have engineering questions, it's that persona, right? So you basically create memory spaces for
but this is usages. What ChatGPT is doing with its GPTs, isn't it?
I would say ChatGPT is the worst when it comes to this. I think they are sort of half-assing it. Like they want to like use one universal genie and not agents. I would prefer to use agents for that. Custom GPTs allow you to you come in with somebody else's pre-prompt that you don't have to recontextualize. But I find that it's much easier to just create like a master prompt put it in a PDF, and then put the PDF into ChatGPT while I'm prompting it something else. I find that strategy to be, so I'm basically reverse engineering what Claude does really well for ChatGPT. So
But Claude in itself isn't. You mean the Claude chat client?
yes, so the way that Claude communicates with you, that there are rules, there are system prompts, there are pre-prompts, then there's task definitions. So I have that for ChatGPT. I had that for ChatGPT even before I started using Claude. And the way I work with it is I have a Notion document, I export it to PDF, and I upload it into a new GPT in ChatGPT, and then I prompt it. And then I say, because it can reason, it can read the PDF, it can visually analyze the PDF, right? I can just upload it once, and it's very easy. Like, it's compressed, right? So it's much more efficient on the token space. So I can just give it the PDF, and it can just reason about it very quickly, and I can then continue prompting it. Yeah, so that's that. For what else? Another usage that I see often is Copilot usage. So people writing prose in code. For coding, I'm not sure. I would have to see a research paper on that, because I generally, when I'm pairing with somebody, coaching or for work, I ask them to turn off Copilot.
You mean the autocompleter?
The shadow functionality. So they can use the sidebar conversation, but I usually ask them to turn off the shadow hints, right? So especially
those things with you except with tab, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. So
Because it generally, we generally go into this from a perspective of we want to write code together. So we are in a discussion, and oftentimes we have two IDEs open, and they have their IDE open and I have my IDE open. So it's more important that we contextualize what our conversation is about rather than what they write into the prompt. So the genie that gives them code completion or a full agentic workflow, in order for it to be efficient, it would have to listen to our conversation, right? So it would have to receive a live transcript of our pairing discussion. Otherwise, we just constantly have to write down what we're discussing so that the AI can stay in the loop. And even then, it's just one of the AIs. So generally, we turn it off because there is so much there's so much information going on from our communication that isn't being written down, that it feels like the Copilot is just too many steps behind us cognitively. It is okay for you manually when you're working alone, because you are more prone to writing stuff. Especially if you're the kind of developer that just needs to write in order to think. So developers who don't do TDD, they generally explore by writing code and then explore the problem so that they can reason about it. So I think that lends itself more to like that solo usage. I would generally stay away from agentic usage if you're pairing a lot, right? So the things that make you a highly proficient team are also those things that will allow AIs to work better. But you need to take what makes you a proficient team, get that into a system prompt, then tell the AI to work that way as well. Because the AI by default will work very badly in a very sloppy way on a way too large batch size, right? So the things I'm coaching for software engineering practices is how to get the team to collaborate better and work in a smaller batch size, right? So that they can say, well, I want to go from green to green and deploy that to the customer and see if we made more money in the smallest amount of time possible with as little speculation as necessary. right? I just want it to be deterministic. I just want to sit down and say, yeah, at 4 p.m. today, we will launch a new feature. Like, that's my holy grail, right? Like, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. So if we create a team that works like that and is very good at working like that, then an AI agent that can churn out 10,000 lines of code in 30 minutes is the enemy, right? And then you basically don't even want to waste time reviewing that code. You just say, no, that's too large, bye-bye, right? Because that's exactly how we treat the humans, right? We tell them, hey, I will have to review it. If it's larger than 50 lines of code, then do not accept that prompt, right? Unless you're doing something extremely valuable on a level that a human couldn't.
But
right?
I
You are
have something
changing
to
something
say.
system-wide.
So the entire code review aspect, it's a little bit like you don't review. Let's say you build the next component in the front end area. So only talking about front end, right? But the same applies actually to backend when you use something like Nest.js, which is heavily class based, and you have those services and you reuse services. As soon as you have reusability in your systems, which means it's based on patterns, and those patterns are defined. And that's the reason why we actually have design systems. That's the reason why we have had things like Ionic or material design or something like that, to have it more standardized and something like that. So those kind of things don't need to be reviewed. That's my point of view. You don't need to review those things. If you review every time again, if a developer is building up a component correctly, then you have another defect in the team. You don't need to do that. So and that is the same thing. So as long as, and that is very contextualized, it is a different thing in a large company with a lot of quality and security concerns. It's another thing in a startup where you are shortly behind after the MVP phase. You try to scale a little bit. You have different, let's say, different conditions there, different circumstances, and you focus on different things. So as a very new startup, you have often no design system whatsoever. You are very exploratory, and that's a place where you really need to work on those kind of things. And you can use AI for that, but that is something you should do as a human being. If you are a scale up where you should have everything in a place already, AI can definitely help you, because what you made the interesting example of, you basically you want to deploy on 4 p.m. a small batch. You can do it with or without AI. So that is not AI is not the enemy in this case. AI is the enemy when you wipe this feature, right? You wipe it together, you dream it together, you don't look at it, you have built a feature of 5 components and not a single feature inside one component. So that can be something as well. For example, you want to have a new download button inside an existing component. AI can do that with a design system very effectively, and you can review it while it's coding. That is an interesting part. So you don't waste time.
The thing is, I'm not interested per se in not working. You said I can review it while it's coding. It's like, yes, but I can code as well.
Yeah, but not as fast as that. And you can already prepare in meanwhile the other things you want to do next.
And that's my main point. I would criticize that kind of workflow because it makes it impossible for somebody to collaborate with you.
But you don't always collaborate. Most developers don't collaborate with other developers in the moment when they write code.
And like, to me, that is a problem worth solving. Right, so if you're taking that problem seriously, then AI usage on an individual level will hinder you from doing that. Right, so I would err more on the side of put AI in your pipeline, and in your meetings, and in your transcripts, and in your product documents. Right, so for example, a good example of AI usage is, we had a meeting in person. In front of a whiteboard. Gemini was recording, digitize the whiteboard and create tickets for that with a summary in ClickUp for Monday. Right? That is a very, very good usage for AI, because it will churn out a lot of text that is there for review if it's necessary, and there is no risk of any kind of inconsistency or small mistake leading up to larger mistakes from that activity itself, right? What I'm saying is that when it comes to developing features, what I want to always get it down to, sort of for like a perspective of a 10 to 30 size team of software engineers that are mixed with domain experts, designers, etc., is that the best possible outcome that for them to be effective is to get them down to a fixed cost sort of deliverable, right? So that they can get their workflow down to whatever happens, we will always produce an increment of this size in this time, and we will communicate on two areas. What is the priority and whether or not to continue with it, right? So not from a perspective of this might take an infinite amount of time, but the increment that we have produced and we will consistently produce it said that this is an easy problem, or the increment said that this is a much bigger problem than we anticipate, and we sort of don't see the end of it, right? So I want that team to learn how to ruthlessly cut scope, to really understand what is the highest priority, to really understand what can be cut out from the features, and then write the minimum amount of code possible, while at the same time we want to maximize the amount of communication the team is doing without having meetings, without having disruptive non-working meetings. To me, having an agent that is able to write more code very quickly also creates pressure on the team to increase its batch size.
You focus way too much on the generative side of thousands of lines of code you want to create. So this is wipe coding that doesn't work. We don't need to talk about that one. But where AI often helps, and when you work a lot, as I said, in existing code bases with things like React, which is very common, you don't build a feature and you just have it there. You have a design layer system, as I said, and this repeats. You basically have hooks you reuse in nearly every file on some point in time, especially when you have dynamic theming systems and these kind of things. And working in those, in small projects, small code bases, small landing pages, doesn't matter at all, right? This is not what I'm talking about.
I mean, it does matter. I don't generally work in small code bases, and if I did, I probably wouldn't use AIs for them.
Exactly. Me either. So it's like for me, it's like when you have this complexity where you want to make a change and you need to roll out this change intelligently over basically larger, let's say a larger amount of files. Let's say you have a change and you have the change in 15 files, and the interface changes, the schema changes, some regex changes, the schema of GraphQL changes, so the mappings are changing. And you can do that, of course, all by yourself. But in reality, you can basically say you have your tests in place, you have the outcome in place. This is perfect. I really say perfect for AI, and you can save a lot of time, because this is mentally exhausting to work in 15 files simultaneously and you try to not forget anything, and you are totally focused on that one. You don't do anything other productive in that moment. And AI is doing that in 10 seconds.
That's what I meant from like the perspective of, thousands of lines of code. It's that. So you call this vibe coding. I disagree. It's not vibe coding. It is that if this is exhausting for a human, they will slow down. And that the fact that they're slowing down is a good thing. Because the issue is that if I have to change 15 lines of code, then the change I want to do is not cohesive with the code base. So that there is an architecture issue. If I want to change the signature of a function, for example, like using your example, I need to have many files open. Then whatever change needs me to open up 20 files and change something simultaneously in a single step, and that cannot be done with static analysis refactoring tools like IntelliJ's refactoring across the entire code base. Let's assume that the code base is just too large, that it just doesn't fit in the memory space of an IDE that can use 16 gigs of RAM. The fact that that is difficult to do is a good thing, because that is a signal to the team that architectural cohesion was lost as the project grew. So that is
I disagree very heavily on that one. that
Let me finish.
might
I
apply
know
for
you can
for
disagree
something.
and you can respond to it. Just let me finish.
Yeah.
There are signals constantly happening in the code base with regards to, let's say, the health of the code base. So how easy is it for a human to work in that code base? Right? So how human readable is the source code of the code base? Now I can come in and say this code base is in German, or I speak German. This code base is in French. I don't speak French. I will code through Claude, and Claude will reason about the code base for me. That is a very good example of AI usage, because I couldn't reason about it in the code base because I lack familiarity with the code base. The AI tools are extremely good at extracting familiarity with a code base, much better than a human, because they can read it much faster. And the same thing applies to, let's say, there are certain patterns about how to write sensible, functional React code. There are certain patterns about how to work in Ruby on Rails. There are certain patterns about how to work in Kotlin, in Flutter. Claude and other AI tools are very good at picking up a certain style of coding, but they're very bad at following instructions outside of that style. So my instructions, for example, hey, don't touch that file, isolate your changes to this space. It will sometimes deviate from that instruction, or it'll say, oh, I didn't change it and it lied, or it might deceive me. So but that's beside the point. My point is that there are signals in the code base that are meant primarily for getting the attention of the architects. You have a lot of tests. Tests are hard to write. Well, don't use an AI to write them. Act on the signal that the tests are hard to write. Because if you act on the signal by using an AI to write them, they will continue to be hard to write, to the point where you lose familiarity, human familiarity, where a human will no longer be able to reason about the code base without an AI. I saw this especially in the early 2000 era, where we went from this Windows development, Turbo Pascal, Visual Basic 3 to 6, and then Visual Studio.NET. When the whole .NET movement started happening, it looked like AI generated. You needed Visual Studio to generate boilerplate for you just to get the app to compile. But no human could write that code manually because it just required way too much cognitive load. And you basically relied on a very expensive IDE. It was expensive at the time.
But this is wipe coding.
I don't know why you're saying that.
Because you said it. You said in the beginning of this, what you want to say, that this is not wipe coding in your idea.
Yeah, so I'm highlighting an example where you have a difficult workflow that is difficult for a human, and it is a little bit easier with a very expensive machine. What I'm saying is that it's much easier to make it ergonomic for the human than it is to get the machine to scale in complexity against that kind of code base. Right?
Yes, but you get to the point where it is workable for humans, and it's still simply because it's a fucking large application.
No, but
you still have.
But that's not
issues.
consistent. But that's not the system. That's not consistent with what you said. You said that that change AI is very good at because it's annoying for a human because they need to have 15 files open. Well, the solution to that is refactoring architecturally into such a shape that a human can do it manually very quickly. That would be a win for me. That is what I would categorize a win. It's like I am doing architectural changes of the nature that require me to change 20 files in one PR or in one commit.
Yeah.
The solution isn't the AI to do it for me. The solution is for me to get help in changing the architecture such that from now on, we can constrain the changes to one file or two files. Because that is essentially architectural cohesion that we want to work on, that we want to improve.
But that is not always possible.
No, but that's my point. It is always possible with infinite money and infinite time. But if it's not possible, if it's not possible and you have the need for it, by choosing to spend on AI on the symptom side, which is it takes a lot of time for the human, it will definitely be a net negative long term, because the messy bits of architecture get messier faster in the areas that get changed frequently. So if you remove the friction for change and the AIs frequently change the messy bits of the code base, the messy bits get messier, right? Adam Thornhill specializes in this kind of, he calls this version control for Git forensics, right? Because you can analyze a code base and say, well, the bits that are most critical to the business usually get changed often, and those bits that change often, they sort of fracture, or they deteriorate in architectural quality the fastest, because like a human brain needs to offset like how the business is changing and how the business is now using it and why we're doing changes to the system. That's kind of the idea with TDD, is like if it's really important, we have the implementation and the behavior. If the behavior that we're building is really important, we will want to refactor it at some point. If it's not important, maybe it's not even worth building it in the first place, right? Like that sort of yin yang, like that counterbalance of pressure, is what's very important for that kind of product development. Now, when it comes to AIs, what I would definitely want to veer off from is that if there's a change that is annoying for a human to do, the best thing to do would actually to make the change easier to do for a human.
It's exhausting, not annoying. Annoying is, I never said annoying, I said exhausting. And then what I mean is a developer, if you have a good environment, you removed unnecessary things, you can, especially in smaller companies, utilize this person for what he is actually or she is actually hired for, which is developing software. And when you do that for, let's say, several hours a day, right, you get simple, mentally exhausted over time to just follow through a lot of code, because you simply need to do that, because sometimes you might have context switches, those kind of things, and they all take mental capacity off you. And you need to plan more. You need to have more high level view, as in my opinion, as an engineer, than actually being in the trenches yourself. And what I actually want to say by that is, when it's clear that you need to change 5 to 10 files for this change, because it's as I said, a hook which is simply in many in many other components used, and it's used differently, or different aspects of that one are used. That can happen as well, especially in states. Then you need to react differently to them. And in order to fulfill that feature, you need to simply go through that 5 to 10 files, which would take you personally, for example, half an hour, in the AI a minute. But you know exactly what you will do, and that's the point. It is not like you let the AI decide what you do. It is just, to, as I said in the beginning, a very good tool for pattern recognition, refactoring, and autocompletion. That is what I meant. It is not for generating entire new features or something like that. And there I don't see any negative aspects so far, even in very good code bases, TDD driven, those kind of things. I see still that the AI is extremely helpful there. I say that firsthand. I'm not like, it's not a theory.
I'm not saying it's not helpful. I'm saying don't overgeneralize its scope. Right? So it's what's a good example of this?
I would rephrase it to don't make it black box. Never allow it to become the dominant part.
I disagree with that. If long term, if AIs take off the way that the whole tech space wants them to take off,
but that's long in the future.
You know, there is a case to be made that vibe coding is the primary interface that it is meant to be used for.
One day, yes, of course, but not in the next 3 years.
but my point is that you're focusing on, let's say, you are the business owner and the founding engineer, and you're focusing on your productivity. I'm saying that is the wrong metric. I'm saying that asking engineers whether they feel they are more productive when they use Claude or Copilot, that is the wrong metric. Because the right way about it, I think, is in a black box, I have a startup and it has 10 engineers and they're not using AI. and I have exactly the same startup and 10 engineers, and they are using AI, is like, how often, if I run that experiment 1,000 times, in how many cases is the AI using startup, equivalent startups, more successful than the one that wasn't using AI? And what workflows are they using? Like this kind of thought experiment. Because from a perspective of just using it for individual developer work, it is very easy for me to say, well, it's exhausting for me, so I'll let the genie take over.
I'm pretty
But then,
sure that the AI is more effective because we
can
are
I
talking.
finish?
Yeah,
Can I finish?
yeah.
But it is very easy to take architectural concerns and shove them under the rug and either make that a problem for somebody else in the pipeline, another human, either make that a problem on the review stage, either make that a problem for product, or maybe we develop too many features, or maybe we just make it a financial problem, like we're just throwing money at the wall by using Copilot, for example. I agree with you when it comes to commoditized solutions, right? So you have a React hook, you're creating a form, the AI was trained on this kind of form, and I can just create the form. Like if I'm a React developer that has never built a form like this, and Claude has seen 100,000, like a login form, sure, I would use it, right? I know that it was trained on it, so it makes no sense for me to sort of reinvent the wheel, right? But that's only for commodity software. That doesn't work well for product software. That doesn't work well for off-the-shelf software, and I'm in the Wardley mapping fields of escalation. It doesn't work well for genuinely creative new ideas. It doesn't work well for custom off-the-shelf software. It doesn't work well for productized software to some degree. It does work well for commoditized software. Now, you can get your workflow down to very small batch sizes. If you're doing TDD, if you're working in small steps, AI can help with that very generally. Again, it'll take a long time to really create a system prompt where the genie will behave, but it's worth it, and it can augment your style of working that way. What I am warning about is that there will be some workflow elements in place where you either need to talk to a product person, or you need to talk to a tester, or you need to talk to another engineer, or where you need to come together as a team. My point is that you working together as a team and rolling out features, if it is slower because somebody on the team is using AI, that is definitely something to take immediate action on. That's where I'm coming with this. Again, from your context of you're the business owner, you're founding engineer, you have a smaller team on a large code base, that makes sense. But on a general case of the rate of change in the project is small compared to the overall size of the project, but the difficulty with which the feature is going out, so we're not doing trivial commodity stuff like changing a hook in a React component, but we're actually rolling out a new product line because we're changing one part of the workflow, and we're sort of diverging the workflow in a different direction. So a workflow that was previously simple is now complicated. There will be data migration involved. That, if it takes more than 2-3 people to adjust, anything that can be expanded upon and sort of exploded upon by AI usage. So exploded, what I mean is that the amount of code generated, right? So the amount of mistakes that can happen because of the amount of generation that did occur from individual AI usage, that is in almost all cases going to result in a larger batch size, which will slow the team down, right? So that is what I would act on, right? That is what I would get down to a level of, if you're going to use ChatGPT to do something, at least build the system prompt together. Like build something small, pair program, build a system prompt, and then rather than saying we will do feature A and feature B, sit together as a team and say we will build feature A as an example, then we will sit down in a mobbing session. In the mobbing session, we will write the system prompt together, and then we will test the genie. And if we confirm that this genie helps us build this feature faster, then we will create a prompt that allows the genie to be used with a certain feature prompt on this problem to be, to help us, shave off a few days on our weekly delivery cycle. Like that to me is sensible. If it is directly, a native component of how the team works, so they sit down together and create system prompts together and feature prompts together, and they help create, the same way that you would do TDD. I don't go in and write down the whole test plan. Like that is the main thing I collaborate with my team on. Anybody can write the implementation. Once we know what we want and we want to come at it from a perspective of, is the engineer who is writing the feature capable of putting on their product hat and basically put themselves in the shoes of the business, put themselves in the shoes of the customer and say, yes, this makes perfect sense to me. This is why we're doing it. And there's a million ways of how to implement it. So there's no point of me romanticizing about the sexiest implementation. I'll just go with the simplest implementation because I know what needs to get done. In order to get to that kind of state, it does require a lot of thought, design, discussion, not to create the perfect plan, but to create the right amount of constraints so that you can teach the other devs what not to build. And if you can do that with other humans, that kind of workflow lends itself very well to agentic usage, to GPT usage. If you're doing TDD, it's like, I'm going to write a test, you try to implement them, give me feedback as I'm implementing them. Right? So doing some kind of TCR, for example. I write a test, I implement it. If I get it wrong, we roll back and I have the genie explain to me what I did wrong and what the next feasible small step could be. Right? Zombies, for example, is a step that developers struggle with, especially those that I coach with TDD. They don't know how to break down the problem. So they don't know how to break down the problem so they can work on it easy to hard, right? So simple to complex. That's one aspect. And teams don't know, the tech leads don't know how to break up the problem so more people can work on the same problem at the same time rather than parallelizing on adjacent work, right? Like those are the two main things in, let's say, mid-sized, small-sized software engineering teams is that if we have 7 engineers, how can we build the feature faster? How can we go to market faster? Rather than saying, okay, only one engineer can work on it. The best thing to do is to build 5 features in parallel with 7 people because, we're trading off our risk profile that way because it's slow. I don't want to work in that sort of slow space. If there's things slowing us down and collaboration could help, then absolutely collaborate. But everybody's individuated genie that they have configured for themselves will get in the way. So the same way that if you and I are working on the same project, Adrian, we need to use the same linter. That's my point. Like it doesn't make sense for you to use your linter and me to use my linter. It doesn't make sense for you to use tabs and me to use spaces because we're going to drive each other nuts. So our agents also need to be exactly the same. So as I'm talking to an agent building a feature and you're working on the same feature with me, well, you need to be talking to the same agent. You need to be prompting it the same way I am, which means that the humans need to get together and have an agreement about, okay, what's going to be our system prompt building this feature?
Those are context files.
And if you're building every feature that way, and if there's collaboration across the team for that, then that is amazing. But if you're saying that there are things that are exhausting for the team, and now the engineer who's alone, they are now doing that exhausting thing with the GPT, I would say that not including the team into this discussion and checking out, hey, why is it so difficult to change this hook? Why do I need to change 25 files? And if you just have an agent solve that problem because it can generate that code very quickly, I think that long-term is objectively going to escalate that friction and just make it worse over time, because that is an obvious area where a software architect would need to step in, or at least where somebody would need to say that, hey...
But this is not necessarily an issue which needs to be solved. Of course, you can optimize, but sometimes it's simply that systems are large. And when you have, for example, a translation hook, which you use in basically every component you have built, yeah, because you have a translated system. Mm-hmm. Then you make changes to the translation system. And this translation system is basically affecting several hundred files that can be a migration
You're
step.
talking about changing an abstraction.
Yeah, of course. There are many. So I would make it not that complicated. So we cannot cover in one session all circumstances and contexts which are out there in software development. We both don't know them, right? So where I see AI is a big advantage is at the point where you as an individual or as a team, it doesn't matter for me. You know what you want to have. You can outline in your head, but you know it would take you X amount of time, half an hour, something like that, to do it manually, and it reduces this time with you reviewing it to 5 minutes, then for me, it's worth doing it, as long as there I agree when you are using it in your IDE. So when the AI becomes a part of your IDE, then it's cool, which is the case for me. So you have your context. I have 15 context
and
files.
shared across the team.
It is part of the code base. So those context files
part
are
of the
part
code
of the code base. Exactly.
Yes,
you cannot avoid it, right? It is even part we use Cloud Code. In the Cloud Code file, they are
ideally
listed.
the code base and the pipeline, in case there is an element to the pipeline, like memory, for example, memory from the pipeline, that will not be part of the code base, which is a problem.
And then there is this maturity aspect I told in the beginning. You have, on some point in time, you learn what works with AI and what doesn't work. So, for example, any form of design doesn't work with AI at all. You don't use it. So anything of generating basically your entire, let's say, or your planning your next steps to do is something you don't involve AI in. At least in my case, I don't like it because AI doesn't have the entire. AI does understand the implementation. AI doesn't understand the idea behind it, and the reason for that is you basically come from a feedback meeting with clients. You are with your team together, and then you go into development. And the AI is only a steroid helper in the IDE space. And
it
as
lacks
long
the
as
context from that meeting. Like that's the important bit. Yeah.
And I know, for example, from the backend part of our teams, where other two people are working, they don't use AI as much as in the front end. And the reason for that is what they have is more the complexity between systems and services, which the AI is actually not as capable as.
Is not captured in the code base itself.
Exactly. You have
I agree
a lot of integrations, a lot of small steps, which are not really like you cannot tell the AI to make an entire feature there.
This can really be alleviated with a monorepo, with a large monorepo that also has system prompts on the system level design of the system. That is very healthy. So essentially you would need, the equivalent of what is your wiki page at work, what is your, RHP or similar, right? So documentation for workflows, documentation for onboarding, documentation for how to set up your IDE, documentation that explains the overall architecture, product architecture, system architecture, deployment architecture, how the pipeline is set up, the different roles, how to run a meeting, how to be a tech lead, how to be a product lead, how to make design decisions, how to upgrade that critical one library that you need to do once a year, and it's really annoying and very risky. If that wiki is, and now it won't fit in your code base, so it has to be RAG. Like it has to be RAG'd onto the agent, which is why, things like Claude and GPT for enterprise usage, they are going to that kind of RAG model, which is Claude, before responding to your prompt, they might ask the MCP, hey, what systems design level knowledge do I need? And it will go query RHP, for example. It will query your wiki, or it will query your Jira, or it will query your CI/CD pipeline for previous build logs, right? So for example, if you're debugging a problem, you will have the problem expressed maybe in the build pipeline, not in the code base itself, but it might be in the build pipeline somewhere. Or if it's not there, you might actually have a RAG-assisted access for an S3 bucket that has logs and telemetry from confirmed incidents, right? So when you know there is a bug, there's a ticket for the bug. Once you know that the bug was reported, you then say, the bug definitely happened between these two dates on all of these log files, right? So there's 200 megabytes of log files. You send an AI on that and say, hey, try to figure out, this is the problem we're solving, try to figure it out, contextualize it for me. It is extremely beneficial for that. The problem is that those things do not happen in your code base. So you need to you need to treat the agent that is helping you solve these problems as a pipeline, as a product in itself, right? So you as a team, you get better at working better as a team, growing as a team, growing as a product organization, not just as developers. At the same time, you need to become better at using your tools. And one of your tools are the agents. So you can't just, willy-nilly take, pay for Claude and just put Claude in your code base with no system prompts, or copy, some generic system prompt from one of the public
doesn't
repo.
work. That doesn't work.
And it's annoying, right? You and I tried that. We tried TDDing with Claude on like a very simple TDD problem. And the main issue why it wasn't, you said it can take 30 minutes for a human or 5 minutes for that 5 minutes to review if I'm using Claude with it. Yes, but you're only discussing the happy path, right? If we're not on the happy path and we need to improve the system prompt, I might actually need to spend 4 hours improving the system prompt so that it can give me the 5-minute response, or the response that only takes 5 minutes to review once the system prompt is in place. Now, the question is, was that worth it? Is that system prompt then applicable for similar but different kinds of problems in the same code base? Or was that system prompt used only to solve this one problem, and the next problem I'm solving requires a different system prompt? Because if I'm going from, if it would have taken me 30 minutes to do alone, with AI, it's 4 hours to build a system prompt, but then it will get it done in 5 minutes and I just review it. I don't think that's that is a net positive usage of my time.
That's a temporary snapshot, right? So if you build up, you call it system prompts. I use it context files. The reason why I use it context files is because it's basically a human readable MD file. That's the reason. So it is used for either humans and
it's AI a pipeline. At the same time. It's a pipeline for how the agent should reason.
And humans should understand as well. It's a form of a documentation. I was saying it is of course machine readable, but it is of course readable as well for the human being. Which means that if you have something like that, you will actually see smells like, hey, we have a similar we have a similar idea and 5 implementations for that. And every time we tell the AI to do that, it picks one randomly of those implementations and tries to apply that on the other, which is wrong, which creates nonsense code.
And it can loop itself. It can just
so
it can infinitely refactor things for no reason. Yeah.
So there is a process of maturity, so that you should mature as a team and a code base. With those context files and start to refactor your code base to a degree that you understand on some point in time your AI is an extremely effective helper because you have cleaned up your system to a level. This is, I think, what you meant as well with the architecture thing, where you need to get an architect in. I see it from a different angle, but that's actually how you do it as a team to refactor your code base to make it more readable, simple, and less. So especially code bases who just started greenfield and progressed over 3 years have oftentimes multiple implementations for the very same idea. And you need to streamline them to one to make it more effective for new humans to onboard, as well as to the AI, which is basically onboarded every time it's used.
I think there's a case to be made for 2 categories of problems. One category is, I am familiar with the problem being solved. So let's say I'm Shopify. I'm a tech lead or architect inside Shopify. I can familiarize myself with what Shopify does before even joining the company. And then as I'm joining the company, I become an expert in my area and how my team works and how to get the best work out of my team, right? That is one context. I am deeply familiar with how my team works, with how my code base looks, and what the product organization surrounding me wants from this engineering team. Like, do they want more autonomy? Do they want more resilience? Do they want to run more experiments in parallel? Do we need to grow? Do we need to shrink? Do we need to become more efficient? Do we need to become more reliable? Probably a combination of these things. So that's one category of problem. This team is extremely familiar with the code space that it owns, that it either oversees, or maybe it's a custodian of all the possible code bases. So maybe we have 1,000 microservices. and this team can operate on 90% on all the microservices, except a few critical ones, right? Maybe they have access to everything, but everything is done in a certain pattern. Everything is following a certain company standard, and there is an influx that if you need to own a microservice because people who don't own it cannot work within it, that is something that I would treat as an organizational dysfunction, and I would
Yes.
call for an architect to solve
A
that
silo.
problem.
That's a typical silo.
That's a silo. It's like it has that sort of romantic sense of it of we have built this. It has our DNA. We own it. But that is harmful to the overall technical organization if now nobody else can work in that microservice. If now nobody else can work in that component. If only you understand it. And if you go on vacation, that's a huge problem, right? So that's one category of problem. Then there's the other category of problem, which is large enterprise application. Everything is legacy. Everything is at least 20 years old. Everything has seen different versions, different operating systems. Docker what didn't exist when some features were built. Redis was still open source when that thing was built. That's why it uses Redis, and now it's not open source anymore. Now it's a huge problem, and now it's open source again. Sorry for the Redis.
Was a big issue the last 2-3 weeks. Right?
Yeah. And now they're back. Now they're undid some of the license. Some, not all.
But the cloud providers didn't recognize.
But
that
it's
so
dead.
far.
Yeah, but it's like it's disrupted the community, and now it's okay. Anyway, sorry, my bad.
Another topic for another day.
topic. There is a case to be made that no matter who you put in charge, there is a huge disconnect, like almost like a schizophrenic disconnect of there is what the documentation says it should be, and then there is what the implementation is. And the documentation is trying to keep up with the implementation, but it doesn't. So whoever touched it last has more information about it than the documentation itself, right? So it is very difficult to share information, to share implementation insight inside that kind of organization. So think of like a very large organization, 1,000 engineers, a public company, multiple regions across the world, global scope, multiple departments, regional CTOs, right? Like a very, very complicated, think of SAP, think of ThoughtWorks, think of a large agency or a large insurance company that it basically operates technologically differently in every single legal jurisdiction in every single company. In that kind of category of problem, engineers will always be completely, as maximally as possible, 99% unfamiliar with most of the code base. AIs are very good at reasoning about those code bases, even though the engineer might build the software better if they were familiar with it, right? So this now lends itself to a different category of problem, which is I know how to code very well, but I don't understand the document. I don't understand the implementation, and the implementation does not follow the documentation. The implementation has evolved beyond what was last documented. So AIs work very well in that kind of space because whatever I instruct, the GPT, the agent, will run into problems caused by my lack of understanding, my lack of familiarity with the problem, and not even an architect would help with that, right? So it would require
you can't change it really. It's like,
and you can't change it, and you can't fix it. Like you can't put that knowledge, you can't put that context into.
It sounds expensive, to be honest.
Because it sounds extremely expensive. Yes, it is extremely expensive to solve the architectural problem. So we will use an even more expensive, but less expensive than the labor cost of rewriting the software. We will use a expensive AI that we will feed the entire code base to. That is a one-time cost. And the AI will become very good at reasoning about the context. I think there are large consultancies in the world that specialize in this category of problem, which is they use AIs to just read a huge chunk of large code bases, and then you ask it, hey, explain it to me, right? So you basically have Google at your disposal, a very smart Google search engine, and then you put your code base into that, and then you ask it questions, right? That is extremely valuable. Now, there are engineers who want the best of both worlds. right? It's like, I want to run the show. I wanted to code in such a way that I will be happy with the code. I want to do as little coding as possible. At the same time, I want to be familiar with the code base, and I want changes to the code base to be cheap, right? Like, I think early on, as your team decides to use agentic usage for coding, you sort of need to make a decision. Like, are you familiar with the code base? Do you want the Genie to help you make the code base more human readable? Or are we just treating it like a legacy problem, and we need to be extremely defensive when we're doing any kind of change? We need to like redo the tests, redo the testing, redo security penetration. So you're coming at it from this perspective of, I wouldn't even trust a human to make changes to the system, let alone a agent.
Yes.
Right? And that is a completely different, think of defense organizations, security, electrical infrastructure.
Most large companies older than 20 years old. That's like they have developed software in such a different way, mainframe, those kind of things.
COBOL, old mainframes. Yeah.
We still, when we want to integrate SAP, we constantly integrating SAP into our systems. It is like every second vendor is coming up with OCI things like those. Yeah. They are legacy for like 5 years ago. They were legacy already. They are still coming up with, could we use it? We don't like the new ones. And it's a little bit like they have so many integrations, which are so old that they still need to maintain it because so many other large clients actually use it still.
Yeah, right? And the protocol is old, right? So when I started coding, enterprise integrations were done with SOAP 1.1, right?
Oh God, yeah.
Like now
we still have SOAP in place, 1.1, 1.2.
Yeah, that's so I wouldn't want to become an expert in that, right? I would rather use an AI agent to say, well, if our team ever needs to change the thing that is using SOAP, we will do one of two things. We will migrate it to a more modern protocol, or we will have an AI help us reason about the old protocol. But we will not become experts. We don't want our engineers to become experts in SOAP 1.1, right? Like that is then a reasonable trade-off that you make. And then you document that decision, you make that decision as a team, and then you ideally include it into your system prompt so that no matter who's working in that area of the code base, at least they act consistently with the decision of the organization. Otherwise, your Genie gets out of control. It's like, oh, this is a really old, hey, there's a bug in this integration. And then the Genie says, okay, oh, I see it now. Yeah, I fixed 2 bugs and I migrated it to SOAP 1.2. It's like, no, undo. Let's try it. And then you give it those critical, very important. Do not change. Do not fix that bug.
But that's one of the downsides. The guardrails are very hard to implement for AI. When you need to have a system where you need to have more guardrails than actually anything else, AI will never be worth it. This is my personal opinion, because AI is simply not capable of grasping all these things. Because if you have a lot of guardrails, you don't make small batch changes. It's like you make large things because you try to do many things at the same time. So you need to have a lot of guardrails to manage that somehow.
I don't have a problem with that, personally. I think guardrails are good. I think TDD is sort of lending ourselves to working in that manner. Also, organizational constraints, like, hey, where does our product organization want to go? It's like, oh, we're focused on this and nothing else. We're focusing on this in the next quarter. We might consider this, but everything else is off the table until we show incremental progress on our growth trajectories or the OKRs or the KPIs. What I want to focus on, when it comes to sort of guardrails is, if there are guardrails in place, I want them to be followed and not touched, right? So I want. Oftentimes, I will do TDD, and I will say, here's my tests. Don't change my tests. I wrote the tests. We're implementing the first test. Leave the other ones alone, and don't touch the tests. Critical, very important. Do not modify the tests. And maybe there is some issue, or it will not know how to implement it. And it might either hallucinate or lie and change the test to make it pass. And that's the issue. Like, the guardrails are fine, as long as the freaking Genie does not touch the guardrails that I've just put in place, unless I prompted it to, right? So this is also extremely important when you're doing TDD. It's like, you either need to be testing or implementing or refactoring, and you're doing design in the refactoring step, and you're doing thinking about the design in the failing test step, right? So you are never designing in the green phase, right? So the reason 3D is hard for a lot of developers is because it requires you to sort of stop and think about the problem. And a lot of engineers just enjoy writing code in order to be able to think about the code. Right?
But that's wrong.
and
That's wrong.
Wrong.
No,
not
no,
wrong.
no, no. I would say
I
it's
agree with
wrong
you, it's
because
not
you
good.
can write down your problem in normal text. You don't need to write it down as code. And if you, that's
I
my
agree with
personal
you.
opinion.
I agree with you, but calling it wrong is just going to alienate a lot of people who enjoy working like that. Like there is an element of enjoyment of working like
The
that.
problem is if everyone in a team would work like that, you basically would have 10 people doing pioneers work every day. It is not
I
like
agree.
you don't
I agree.
build systems
It is unhealthy
when everyone is a system
long-term.
designer in your team.
It is unhealthy long term for the product engineering organization.
Yeah, it is simply not working. Yeah.
So my point is, you never want to design in the green phase. Like I have a test, I have chosen a design, I now need to implement it, and then once it's working, I will then test my design, change the design if it's not okay, refactor it if there's some issue. But there's definitely an element of I need to make the best next step now with minimal amount of design, then I need to do minimal amount of implementation, and then I need to validate that my decisions were correct before I move on, right? So I don't do major architectural generalizations and like weird abstractions that I don't need way too early. And if I do make that mistake of like, oh, too big, I can step back and say, you know what, let's revert, let's do it simpler. With AIs, Claude especially, Claude is terrible at this. It is sometimes trying to solve too many things at the same time, and it can get carried away. And sometimes it might ignore some tests, remove some tests, modify the tests in a slight manner, in a way that makes it hard to follow what it did exactly.
You mean Claude Code?
Yeah, Claude Code. Yeah.
It never changed a test when I didn't tell it to. Maybe it's because of my
I'm not saying it always does this. What I am saying is that it's very difficult to guarantee that it never does, right? So what I would do is, I would like there to be a pipeline that says, hey, the Genie is coding. If the Genie changes the tests, immediately revert that. Immediately say to the Genie, no, you're not allowed, right? If I, the human, have to do that, that is then an additional cognitive load that will cause frustration when it starts hallucinating, right? So I would always put that into the pipeline itself. It's like, hey, in what mode am I running the Genie? It's very difficult to express that mode because it is very bad at following instruction. Like for some reason, it's very good at following the system prompts, but very bad at following instruction in conversation. I don't know why that is. I'm not an expert. If somebody here in chat knows why that is. But that is sort of the thing that causes frustration in a developer. And if there is a tool that can cause frustration in a developer, I would take it seriously. Because I don't want my developers to be frustrated, right? Especially if I'm encouraging AI usage, because
but you need to mature this process. So I think what many people make wrong in any way is, first of all, saying that AI. So many people think that AI comes out of the box and need to work today. So AI is a very advanced tooling, right? You can use, and you need to start to learn to work with it. It is a very complex tool. It is like if you go for archery, you can just take a simple wooden bow and start to shoot with it, or you take a compound bow, which is a total art to shoot with it correctly and not kill yourself with that, right? And that's a little bit like those kind of things. You really need to mature in order to work with it correctly. And AI simply, when you had a messy code base, 3 developers not working together, never paired, don't write tests. One is writing tests sometimes, the others don't know exactly how to start a test, right? If you have something like that, and one is using Material, the other is using CSS manually because they disagree on the design system stuff, you will never get AI to work properly in those kind of projects. But this is a sign that your team is not maturing at all. And that is how the reason why the coaches mostly exist and fractional CTOs is because that is the case out there.
Yeah, of
and
course.
if you would
I would
fix
say that most teams are like that. Like I don't want to alienate. I don't want to paint a perfect picture.
Yeah.
That 99% of the teams out there don't fit, and now alienate 99% of the teams and make them feel like shit and
No,
say,
but you can motivate them to become better.
but that's
And that-
different, right? So I don't want to motivate them to become better by constantly dangling their weaknesses in front of their face. Like, so the motivation has to be compelled
Yeah.
from their strengths, from what they are good at, and the issues that they have, the friction that they have, is getting in the way of them expressing their talents. Now, a lot of people aren't talented. A lot of people just aren't as good as they think they are.
Now you're dangling.
And yes, now I'm dangling. A lot of people are not as good as they think they are. But there are some people that, if you figure out how to work with them, they'll be extremely productive. And they will enjoy being productive. And people will enjoy working with them when they're in that state. And when they're not in that state, they will say, hey, usually you're in that state. What's going on here? It's like, oh, this is a more difficult project. I'm struggling to keeping up with this detail or that person. That's the important stuff. You know, that's the magic that makes great teams click. It's like, hey, usually you're here. Why is it difficult to be here on this team, on this project, right? And then that creates interesting conversations. And you can have that relationship with the code base as well, which is, I really enjoy working in that part of the code base, and I hate working in that part of the code base. In that part of the code base, I cannot show my talent. In that part of the code base, there's just something constantly preventing me from moving forward. And it is usually the linters, the tools, the things, the guardrails that would help you move in that direction, right? So for example, I find it very difficult to work in code bases that have no guardrails, where there's no linter, where there's no tests, where there's no, right? So when there's like, you can do anything you want, but you also need to test everything manually.
I know,
very
but
difficult to work in that.
But guardrails are a result of a matured process, mostly where you had good leadership, which was making sure that you have an aligned.
I would go
way
further. I would go further. They are not a result of a mature leadership. They are a result of the maturation process of that team. They are a result of them saying, you know what? We learned our lesson.
Which is the same thing.
Well, it depends. It depends, because you can come in as a mature person, as a mature fractional CTO, but the engineering org around you isn't. So they still
you need to help them mature. That's your job.
And you need to
as a
help
leader.
them mature. So the problem, my point is, you can come in as, you can now join a completely dysfunctional team, and you can set processes in place. Those processes will not be as effective.
No, that's management. I'm talking about leadership. Yes. I'm talking about human relation leadership, not what people call leadership, but which is management. I'm calling about how you lead humans to a new goal and on a journey to change themselves and how they actually work. That's what I'm talking about.
Connecting to my point from our earlier discussion on like the how much freedom, like how much lines of code, let's say freedom a step should have, is there's a lot of value in that maturation process of the humans. There is no value in the AI taking over that maturation process, because it probably isn't repeatable, right? An immature team that uses a genie to solve their problems will probably continue creating those immature outputs, those immature decisions, those immature mistakes. And then the genie will constantly have to correct them, and it will be happy to correct them until it becomes too expensive to correct them, or there's some other dysfunction that will then compound into the future. Right? So what I'm saying is that if the genie gets in the way of the maturation process, that is a serious issue, right? So if you think your team is unproductive because you're not doing continuous delivery, because you can't stand working together, right? If you're saying, hey, I don't want to pair anymore because it annoys me when people watch me code and we fight constantly and we have disagreements on architecture and yada, yada, yada. I can't work with my team. I would rather just leave me alone and let me work. That is an issue worth solving, right? And if you're using AI in such a way to squeeze out more productivity from such a dysfunctional team that otherwise could be talented if you allow that maturation process to continue, then if you're using that genie as a band-aid, it will also compound the issues that the teams is deliberately not facing, right? So if you're making it easy for the team to settle into their resistance to change, right? And that's very important. So as a coach, what I'm most often involved in is actually change management. It's not really technical training, it's really figuring out what is the rate of training that the team really needs and could benefit from. It's not really, yeah, I can teach you everything I know, but will you apply it? Do you need to apply it right now? Is that your biggest problem right now? Who's stopping this?
Yeah,
Like, how come somebody from the outside needs to come in order for you to learn? How come learning doesn't happen on its own? What do you do when opportunities for lessons appear for the team in everyday work, in a meeting, in a conversation, in a annoying or exhausting code review, an exhausting pull request, an exhausting bug fix? How does the learning happen there? If the answer is, oh, we just put it in ChatGPT and see what happens, that I would put into the negative camp of, oh, that's bad usage, right? Because it gets in the way. It sort of puts a band-aid. It sort of flicks the, I don't know what the word, like it's like, there's cracks on the wall, like the underlying fundamental structure of the wall is cracking, and what you see is the paint cracking, so you just paint it over, but the wall is still cracked. So you'll constantly it's just patchwork. Yes, so you're just patching the wall, but the underlying structure, you might have termites in the wall, and you're just hiding the aesthetic issues, right? So a lot of people are,
yeah, that's a good point.
yeah. So a lot of engineering organizations are like dogfooding AI usage because they want to squeeze out more productivity. They think, oh, engineers with AI, 20%, just 20% more productive. And it's much easier to get 10x, 100x increases in productivity by just making your product organization more learning focused, by making it better, but just adopting, just things we know from extreme programming, from lean product, from the Silicon Valley product group, right? So it's just, there is enough research for us to build very, very reasonable, mature product engineering organizations. And using AIs is not on that, like it's not even in that trajectory. It's not even in that general area, because that organization is not learning focused. That organization is a feature factory that is focused on output. And unless we're doing less output and more outcomes, then I wouldn't want to make that process faster. I would ideally want to slow that process down to the degree that the pain increases beyond the threshold that the organization starts learning and sort of starts breaking out from their resistance. And usually this happens at the top, right? So from my context, if you're solving these band-aids with AI usage, then what I will be looking for is, well, if our release frequency or issues or, I don't know, negative 360 reviews for how the meetings are going in the team or on the sprint plannings or whatever you're doing for like just a temperature check within the human social landscape. If that's not improving and the AI tools are expensive, then I would cut that experiment and try something else. Right?
But then we could wrap up, because I actually don't have time anymore. But
cool.
one of the aspects I now take from this conversation, is that AI is actually not a big problem here. So the problem is still the teams themselves. So we have a lot of issues set there, a lot of dysfunction in the teams. Oftentimes, a totally missing intentional culture. So there's often just a random culture there, random people, alpha people, silos, but no leadership at all. There's no common system. There's no system at all. There's no, what I call context and you call guardrails. Those kind of things are simply not in place. And no one is trying to get actually implementing. No one is trying to simplify things. No one is trying to streamline things. So refactoring is not a big thing. The idea of 60% refactoring per year per code base, those kind of things aren't in place. And it is wrong entirely on LinkedIn, on all the other places, to discuss all day long if AI creates crap output or not. It is mostly based on, because people saying, the AI is trained on something out there. No, the AI is mainly working with your code base, what it sees, right? It is reacting to that.
I saw this quote on, the AIs are not trained on good code. The AIs are trained on your code,
Yeah, it is actually
right? So
what it is.
like if you think you're the average developer, the AIs were not trained on genius code and filtered out everything else. Like they needed volume, so the volume is at the average level, right?
I think one of the big misconceptions is, first of all, people are way too much on the generative side. So people think that, hey, AI was trained on Stack Overflow. It doesn't really matter what it was trained for. It will work on what you tell it to. So the typical, how we started with, I copy a snippet of code into ChatGPT and expect that the other 1900 files, right, is somehow understood as well, right? And all the other differences of this exact thing in another code base part, which is older than that one, is respected as well, which is not the case.
Or
so
it's
you need to
hallucinating,
make
and it thinks that you're using some general version, some general library, and it's
exactly, and that's you need to. It is a little bit like testing things. If you have seen, for example, I saw that Claude Code was always using Cypress tests in the beginning differently than we actually already implemented them. And we basically fixed it by putting that explicitly as context how to test. And we said, don't import it from React 18 package and, like that. It simply doesn't work in an environment. You need to put it like that. We expect this and those kind of things. But we basically don't do testing like in that web pace anymore. We write the test
I think for
ourselves.
code generation refactoring, it needs to be in IDE, it needs to be on your code base, and it needs to be using your pipeline. So every prompt, the system prompt needs to include things like it has to run the pipeline, it has to run the tests, it has to run the linter, it has to run the formatter, it has to run any kind of documentation step, it has to run anything that you have a tool for automatically running in the pipeline. Claude Code needs to run on every single generation, because if it generates something that I then would reject because I wouldn't allow it to pass review, I don't want to reprompt it if it can figure this out itself, right? From a perspective of the teams, and I think I forgot what I wanted to say. I forgot. Okay, there was a point. I lost it. Next time.
You said don't do this. We have explicitly in our system prompt one line is like, don't execute the next dev server, because it will basically stuck you in a loop, right? And it was really doing that in the very beginning. Every time it was like, I'm finished. I was running the test. It works. I do the compile. It works. And now I'm testing it. And then it just stuck because it started the server and watching the server. Those kind of things are okay. Probably a problem in the beginning. Doesn't do that anymore today. But those kind of things you can easily go and say, hey, just don't do that. And my personal experience is there are just some special things it simply ignores, because I think there is another problem. Like, it always adds comments, no matter what you tell it. It always gets comments. And it is the same why ChatGPT always adds an M dash, and no matter what you say. So, and I think the reason for that is those kind of things aren't part of the LLM itself. It is part of the execution of whatever happens around the LLM. This is, I think, just a hard-coded part you can avoid.
I don't want to speculate on that. It might just be that it's trained. It might be that the humans who have picked and labeled the training data had bias, and this is just bias that stands out in this context. I would err on that side. I wouldn't even attribute this to malignant behavior.
The point is, why is it actually capable of doing in way more complex things? It is actually hearing to you and respecting things, but some specific things it's not. So that's very interesting. But let's keep it with that one. I like to speculate. Speculations are interesting. We are streaming here. It's about speculations anyway.
Hey, in one of my workshops, it's called no speculation engineering leadership, and it's a twist on how to.
But this is not a webinar. This is a stream.
No, so I'm leaning more on this side of, like, it has to be deterministic. It has to make sense for you, for the humans. It has to make sense for your team, and if you're doing any kind of agentic usage outside of the context of your team, and you're not feeding it, like you're not investing time into making sure that it's better, it's probably not going to pan out. In
AI in a team is not your personal assistant.
Exactly.
AI must
Yeah.
be part of the IDE. That's a very important topic.
Yeah, and it needs to put its memory into the code base, or it needs to put its memory in somewhere where the other MCPs or agents can access it, or a wiki page. Because otherwise, for example, if it puts its memory into issues, I think Copilot agent, like the GitHub agent, is doing this in some way, right? Like it's keeping a GitHub plus, like the issue tracker, the pull request comments aren't in the code base, but they are on GitHub. That is a very rich source of information, right? So if you're doing GitHub forensics, that is actually very valuable. The conversations around the PRs are often more valuable than the code that was accepted. And if you can train that on like the history of your team or like how they communicate with each other, I think that is the future. But if you're doing a homegrown equivalent of that with Claude Code and you're not keeping track of the memory, you're not keeping track of the system prompts, you're throwing them away for every feature, and if every developer has a different workflow, I think you're just undermining your your potential, because you're investing a lot into just trying to keep it to behave in a deterministic manner.
You said there was an interesting part with a code review history.
CodeScene does this very well.
But you can actually do that. So if you extract your discussions from the thing and basically create context out of that. So let's say some form of result in decision making, right? So every decision we have made, you can basically contextify for the future AI prompts. It's actually possible.
I would err on the side of MCP and RAG rather than context files. So I would rather it is kept there in its purest form, historically, terabytes upon terabytes of conversations, and it learns how to index and search that space, rather than me saying, okay, find an example of this, put it in a context file, find an example of that, put it in a context file, because then somebody needs to manage the context files and update them whenever there's an interesting conversation, which is then another thing a human has to manage, right? So I would rather have the RAG model, and I would rather have, I often as a coach, I just look at like a year of pull requests, and I look at the largest pull request that got merged, the largest pull request that got abandoned, and the most discussion-heavy pull requests. And I just spent a day reading that. And I will learn a lot about this team. It's like, hey, last year when you did this, you've actually solved this problem already in that code base. But now somebody else is running it, and they don't know that you've already solved this problem, right? So like as a coach, for me to have that insight, that is insight that is available to an AI instantly, because they can reason about it this way. But I think teams that just don't have a context for thinking about themselves as this, it's like your GitHub repository, your Jira comments, they are your DNA. They are explaining how you communicate with each other, whether you're passive aggressive, whether you're being more positive or solution oriented or problem oriented, or just feed that to the GPT, not how you code. Just teach the machine how you work together as a team, and let it help you with that. Let it help you. Let the GPT say, hey, usually when you do this, you abandon the feature and you take a way too large step, and then problems happen. Let's try to avoid that. Because if you are biased as the operator of the AI, you will also bias it to make the same mistakes you are, right? So I wouldn't want to then leverage and scale the bad decisions the team is making. I would rather fix them at their root, which is teaching the humans to make better human decisions, and then basically training AI on their maturity path, on how they improved, rather than what the correct, according to Microsoft's current model, what is the correct solution here? I don't care about that. I want to learn how the team works, and what is a bad decision for a team and a good decision for a team, and how they learn from that. Right? It is also the same way that I agree with Kent Beck when he's now experimenting. He calls them genie, which is a phrase that I like adopting. I don't care how to code a problem. I want the GPT to understand which suggestions I accept and which ones I don't. I want the GPT, the Claude Code, to understand which PRs do get merged quickly and which PRs don't get merged quickly. I want to be looking at what kind of behavior from the developer causes the feature to be deployed in 2 days, and what kind of behavior from the developer causes it to be deployed in 2 weeks. Right? If that's happening on the same team, then I want the genie to understand the differences that the quality of the decision that the engineer is doing, the pattern behind that, and if something that can be extracted to then, without being prompted, to help that engineer who is making the bad kind of decisions to be gently steered into the good kind of decisions without being toxic, without being controlling, without being judgmental, right? So it's just helping you create guardrails where the GPT says, oh, sounds like you're making a too large step. Let's start with this first. That's what I would want. I would want the genie to be more coaching oriented and be less like a slave.
Did you, because as a last thing, because you said in a toxic way to this, did you notice that ChatGPT in advanced voice mode is now talking lately like a lazy student to you? It's like, no, just do that like that.
I don't want to speculate on that.
It's so funny, but
I messed around.
It became lazy. It became lazy.
What is it? The crazy mode on Grok AI. So it can do a lot of crazy things if you ask it to do crazy things. So I wouldn't.
Monday is interesting.
Next time. Everybody, we had a lot of people. We have 10 on your stream. We had 16 on my stream. Richard, Josip, hello. It was a long discussion. We have the full recording on YouTube. It'll be available immediately if you want to rewatch. Hope this was educational, entertaining, useful. If you have any comments, you can reach out to us on Crafting Tech Teams for myself, Snackable CTO on Substack for Adrian. You can find our LinkedIn's as always. It's in the show notes and on our profile pages. And on YouTube, you will find the archive under Our Tech Journey. Adrian, this was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Likewise. Sorry for going over. And I don't know what's going to be next week, but I think it's continuous delivery next week. Another aspect of continuous deployment. I will take care of that. And we'll take it then. I will do the outro. I will sign everybody off with some gentle elevator music.
How was the camera today?
I think yours was very good. Yeah, yours was very good. Mine is acting up. Mine was
not overheating, but I still need to have that. Need to prepare for when the hot days are coming.
Okay. Doing the Rausschmeiße Musik.
See you, everyone.
Adrian. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.